Good evening. Good evening. What a nice crowd. Thank you. My name is Vivian Fisher, and I want to welcome you all to the Inner Pratt Free Library Writers Live Series with Samuel Freedman, Wayne Dawkins, and Shipp. Also, I am pleased to introduce our guests. But before I begin with the introductions for this evening's program, I would like to remind you that we have some upcoming programs which you can check out on our web page and in our conference newsletter. Also, at the end of the program, we'll have about a 15-minute Q&A, um, and we will have a bookseller outside that will be selling books for your purchase. So please, so I'm going to start this evening introducing Samuel Freedman, who is an award-winning author, columnist, and professor. He is the author of 10 acclaimed books, including his latest work, Breaking the Line, the season in black football that transformed the sport and changed the course of civil rights. He is a journalism professor at Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism and a former staff reporter and columnist at the New York Times. He runs a renowned book writing seminar each year, spring, and he has won numerous awards for his works as a journalist and author. He has contributed to numerous publications and websites, including the New Yorker, the Washington Post, the Root, and the Rolling Stone, to name a few. Wayne Dawkins is an associate professor at Morgan State University's School of Global Journalism and Communication. A former newspaper reporter and editor, he is the author of numerous books, including City Sun, H.W. Cooper's Impact on Modern Day Brooklyn, and Rugged Waters, Black Journalists Swim the Mainstream, and Black Journalists. He will be discussing his latest work, Emanuel Celler, Immigration and Civil Rights Champion. And our moderator for this evening is Shipp, who is a Pulitzer Prize winning op-ed columnist and a multimedia journalism professor at Morgan State University's School of Global Journalism and Communication. As a columnist for the New York Daily News, she was awarded the 1996 Pulitzer Prize for commentary for her penetrating columns on race, welfare, and other social issues. She had worked at Columbia University and Hofstra University, and she served as ombudsman at the Washington Post. Please join me in welcoming this distinguished guest to the Pratt Library.
I think as a nonfiction writer, though I love news, I work on newspapers and I magazine writing. I probably love reading magazines, like writing for magazines, but that's another discussion. But rewriting books is about time, and as much as a lot of us have also with this daily choice, almost everything we write is categories. Either you have not enough time to really know what you're writing, but you have enough space to write it, where you have enough time to learn it, but not enough space to adequately tell it. And with books, you're going to be able to have vastly larger capacities for time and space also to really be in control, as Marx would say, means production. I mean, you work with them, you work with one other, face yourself in one other person involved. You're not being edited by committee, you're not going through there's a copy of it. And I also found that pretty satisfying way to work. So, in the end, I was willing to sacrifice with being on place at times where people read the work because it's a beautiful box. But I realized that I was being read because of the box. And even though it meant probably sacrificing 90% of people who would read everything I wrote, I wanted to be read for me, not the box.
People who really formed the National Association of Black Poets because there's just this story of approximately so many people did it, and a lot of people claiming they advances. I said, well, let me be audacious enough to find them. So I think my epitaph that I found I tracked down every living founder, and it's 44 of them. Okay, I've had some people try, well-known people confront me, and because I looked. And but after that, like Sam, sometimes what drives me around other folks is just to find stories about people that are significant, but they get forgotten for whatever reason. And we're going to hear about two people who actually knew each other, think on things. I like to be bold with Emanuel Celler and say he arguably is the most important person in the 20th century that few people know exists. And for arguably, I have 400, 400 laws this day on it and 4 constitutional amendments he called.
Yeah, that was the detail that knocked me out, the 4 constitutional amendments.
Mhm. The federal courthouse. Then they took
Sure. A lot of my principles were given out to me during the 1940s when he's mayor of Minneapolis at a time when the city is nationally notorious for racism and anti-Semitism. In fact, when you read the police brutality files, that period is I do see the road to which Floyd's murder having been paved then. And Humphrey, in his few years as mayor, took incredible steps to make this united city turn into instead of a national beacon of progress, Senate so fast he never completed. But the things he did, whether it was pushing through laws on fair employment or an end to restrictive covenants in housing, the language neighborhood associations with bills of sale that don't allow people to sell homes to blacks or Jews, is he brought Professor Fisk, who was senior national later education calculus, James Charles Johnson, up to Minneapolis to make the white folks there, under the lead of a black PhD, study the pervasiveness of racism and anti-Semitism in their city. And all of this was very controversial. That leads me to the story that one night in February 1947, as Humphrey is moving forward on a lot of this legislation, he gets out a police car that takes him home after the circuit, typical night. He gets to the front door and first of all, goes to his house. That's not. He's leaning over, fumbling for a key by the front door. Three bullets by his head. And then his wife Muriel, who like pulls him into the house, and they put it together what has happened. And Muriel is like a pet dog, and they theorize what's barking and and then the next thing is within the next week or two, their dog match. And ultimately, the police find a white supremacist with Maynard Orlando Nelson, who has appointed for one knife, literature, correspondence with the infamous Congressman Reagan, before he's speaking in Congress, correspondence with the white supremacist group called the Colombians in Georgia that were later firebombed on Temple in Atlanta. And he's clearly that night. It's a whole other story that maybe later why Humphrey didn't press charge. But I think that's something essential that Humphrey was so out there. There were very few white people who Humphrey on civil rights. You had a great black leader, H. Philip Randolph, who walked away, and Mary McCutcheon, and very sure Carroll. There are only a handful of whites who really do. Emanuel Celler, and Humphrey, and precious few others. And the fact that he's really up his life, he didn't scare him. He just pushed straight ahead all the way to what he did. So that to me is so much the genial guy who got ridicule funny on that he had steel in his backbone when it came to
Um, so I wanted to read how fraught the Civil Rights Bill was, but since you meant the place, it's only about a page. But this is going to kind of take you to where he was going with, also with immigration, which was the main reason why I wrote about him. So Emanuel Celler gave Health Immigration Ally Claire Booth Luce, a Republican elected by Connecticut voters in 1922. She lashed out against British imperial policy manifested in the fatal end to 267 Palestine-bound Jewish refugees for Patria in 1940. In April 1944, she argued that oppressed European Jews could settle in Palestine without restriction. Like Sellers, Luce's immigration views were globally inclusive. World War II realities ultimately reshaped American leaders' attitudes about immigrants and citizens of color. In 1943, Congress repealed the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. China, which had been defending itself against Japan since the early 1930s, had become America's ally. In July 1943, Luce called for repeal of the Chinese Exclusion Act because the law was unpopular even in its time. Furthermore, 100 work permits per year for Chinese visitors who said, hardly threatened America's so-called global. By October, Roosevelt agreed to back it. He also backed self-determination of citizens of the British colony in America and into the ban on immigrants from India. In a few years, the writer, senior editor, and lifetime life Henry R. Luce would collaborate with Celler on successful South Asian legislation. By January 1943, Emanuel Celler submitted the new financial bill H.R. 820. Six other ministers were similar to domestic terrorism against Negroes in the South, was embarrassed as the United States was fighting enemies that practiced racial superiority and extermination. Celler and his like-minded colleagues' anti-lynching bills failed. Nevertheless, by what tart-tongued Luce called lynch-loving work, Southern Democratic members of Congress held significant power. Celler verbally battled with Representative John Rankin of Mississippi, a human volcano of racial and anti-Semitic. Once in the House floor, Rankin addressed Celler as the Jewish gentleman from New York. Celler protested the label. Rankin retorted, does the member from New York object to being called a Jew, or does he object to being called a gentleman? What is the kicking of that? Rankin ridiculed Celler's relentless opposition to the 1924 Johnson Immigration Act. Quote, they, American Jews, whined about discrimination. You know who is being discriminated against? The white people of America, the ones who created this. Rankin also baited race-baited immigration foe Adolph Sabat, a fellow congressman. Rankin routinely uttered that freshman Adam Clayton Jr., African-American brawler, took the unusual and ultimately unsuccessful step of protesting and calling for Rankin's censure. In July 1944, when overload ammunition resulted in the worst front World War II disaster, a horrific explosion that killed 320 sailors at Fort Chicago, California. Rankin fought ferociously. He realized that two-thirds of the victims were black. $1,000 war. Congress compromised and reduced the benefits to Negro Courts Chicago families. He opened in 1940. There have been attempts all through the early 1900s.
Yeah, like a year or two.
Wayne. Tell us about our senior member here, Mr. Celler.
Mm-hmm. He just had this the neighborhood he grew up in Brooklyn. He grew up off Sumner Avenue, right at daughter and emphasize it. And I mean, Williamsburg, yes. In fact, he lived right around where Jay-Z. Um, and it was a polyglot Jew, Irish, Italian, um, black people live all in numbers. And he had an affinity to the people there he was. And he went to boys high school, of course he had to do university. But then he wants to go to law school. He does go, but he didn't have the money. He had an uncle, and said, you know what, I'm going to pay your way to Columbia Law School, but you have to prove that you live like service. And so he's constantly fighting for the underdog, whether it was the first immigration cases. And he represented public. I mean, he was a true believer. He was not afraid to speak up. And his first 10 years in Congress, he said he wasn't sure if he was doing his purpose. Got his and some kind of but no, he was fine. I mean, he had changed immigration laws, and I tend to be crass where I said that after 1920, 40 years, as a nation, we decided we only wanted certain kinds of white people. And he said with me, with a lot here with the mayor and some other Illinois and upstate New York. And I was scared. He walked, he lost often. I think a lot of times like people thought he lost often that, but he was tenacious. He crimes in with his career involved in the congressional board. You can see that dog is still his leg. He's not going to let
Well, I think illustrate this. Humphrey is the least likely person, demographically speaking, to become a champion of the rights of Black and Jews, because he grows up speaking George frequency in a very vanilla place, which is Dolan, South Dakota, this tiny little town. You can see there 500 people out in the eastern grasslands of South Dakota, and there's one Jewish family in town, and about 30 Black people who live 50 miles away from the railroad hub called Huron. The closest thing they have to a minority outside Dolan is a town of French Canadian heritage, which is like the plan reminds them is that backed by the expressions outside the town periodically. So Humphrey grows up in this almost entirely European, urban, British Isles. Anything he has a couple of days of events, his childhood, including meeting this black road rattler who was brought up from Omaha to put in the crowd. At age 11, he befriends him. It's not like that really, sets him on his path, although it says something about his temperament. The thing that changes him is he goes from 1 year of grad school to Louisiana State, to Baton Rouge. In 1939, he's just finally got his bachelor's degree at age 57 because he dropped out of college for 5 years after his family lost its home and lost its family drugstore and the depression. He needed to go back to help them put them to their feet again. So he finally finishes the bachelor's degree, married with a new baby, and LSU offers him $400 as graduate assistantship. And he was like, "You're just playing with the money." But when he goes to LSU, he is plunged into a Jim Crow society for the first time. It literally happens on the train he's taking out of Chicago to Hammond, Louisiana, where he's then going to switch bus to Baton Rouge. As soon as those trains on the Illinois Central would cross of Illinois into Kentucky, all the black passengers were boarded out of the integrated car and moved into this noisy, smoky, smelly, overcrowded car right behind the locomotive, which they called the Jim Crow car. And when Humphrey sees that happen, it's the first in a series of episodes of just a family, his basic little tour. And where he lives in Baton Rouge with Uriel and her daughter Nancy is about a mile and a half from the LSU campus, and in between is the main black neighborhood of LSU, or sometimes South Baton Rouge, or Baton Rouge, sometimes called South Baton Rouge, sometimes called the Bottom. And he sees not only the things we think of from the Jim Crow era, of course, the separate drinking fountains, the back of the bus, the separate waiting rooms. But what really pierced his conscience are these individual episodes, like you recall seeing a black pedestrian trying to cross the street, and he was doing it too slow for white motorist satisfaction, and next thing the motorist out of his car violating the ember. So that has a huge effect on Humphrey, and it ties in because so much of the food is free. I know we'll talk about this later. It's the beginnings of the Black-Jewish alliance, and that's during World War II that these two peoples who were so despised and so marked for extermination by the Nazis, black people and Jewish people, were in the same battle. So it's also at LSU when Humphrey studies that man with the plate, Rudolph Eberle, 1/8 Jewish anti-Nazi professor who's been stripped of his job, kicked out of Germany, left penniless, partly because he's been doing research into how could a democratic society become totalitarian, and partly because it's revealed the Jewish ancestry, even though his family had converted to Christianity generations earlier, but that didn't matter to Hitler. And Eberle ends up at LSU, and in the course of the he has seminar that goes the whole academic, he talks about his research in Germany, which was so he talks about his family, and he explicitly says that the plight of Jews in Nazi Germany is akin to the plight of black in the Jim Crow South. And that's really cool. He also throws down this gauntlet. At one point he says, well, if we were in Germany, maybe two of you would stand up to the Nazis. And Humphrey remembers that for decades. He took it as a mission statement. And what's cool is that a lot of Northerners who've gone to the South and had that experience, when they went back north on the IC, passed from Kentucky into Illinois, and the black passengers who got out of the Jim Crow car, settled back into the integrated car, they would wipe their brow and say, thank God I'm in this much more enlightened part of the U.S. Humphrey is the opposite. When he gets back to Minneapolis to begin his public life, even oblivious up to then about the furious amount of racism and anti-Semitism in Minneapolis. I think it's around. He would see the tensions of the right. When he goes back to LSU, in Baton Rouge, suddenly he has the moral spectacles on to see what's in Minneapolis. That's a great question. The two people who really instruct him in Minneapolis are these two. Cecil Newman is a former Pullman reporter. He takes his earnings to found the main black newspaper in Minneapolis, The Spokesman, which to this day is edited by his granddaughter, Nancy Williams Dillard. And he, among black journalists, the people on the Pittsburgh Courier, and the Baltimore Afro-American, the Defender, they all knew Cecil Newman and thought of him as a peer, but the paper project out nationally, so he wasn't known the way we know those other newspapers. But Cecil Newman was fearless in using his newspaper to call out police brutality, and labor unions that wouldn't have black members, and breweries that wouldn't hire black workers, and the dog whistle terminology that the white newspapers would use when they wrote about black lives, of course, was only about crime. And he had never had power, though. But Humphrey gets to town, and Humphrey has ambitions, and Humphrey has political acumen, but Cecil Newman becomes his tutor on racism in Minneapolis and really broadly racism in this country. they remain so close for the rest of their lives. And the other man I'll just talk about briefly is this Jewish lawyer named Sam Shiner, who, because he's a Jew, no law firm will hire him. He's making his living as a jazz pianist, playing the nightclubs. And in the late 30s, there's so much pro-Nazi activity in Minneapolis called Silver Shirts that the Jews in town pulled together some money and basically Sam Shiner a salary and said, "You can be the one-man anti-defamation." And Sam Shiner is Hubert Humphrey's tutor on anti-Semitism. And this is really important. Shiner and Newman were very close. They worked together. They saw the two issues were one issue. At one point, maybe after Kristallnacht, and Cecil Newman was writing one of his many editorials pointing out that the kind of bigotry that was practiced against Jews in Germany exactly what was practiced against blacks in this country. And I can't remember if it was Kristallnacht or the Nuremberg laws or what other atrocity, but his headline in the book was Hitler must be laughing at because he's doing the same thing that the racists in America are doing. Yeah, Wayne and I were talking about this earlier. It's partly the case of demography is destiny. It's in between the Twin Cities. St. Paul had a Catholic plurality. The Catholics in St. Paul needed to make political alliances with blacks and Jews so they have the majority. So it's not like they're so brilliantly enlightened, but pragmatically, the minorities form the majority. Of course, Minneapolis is an overwhelmingly majority of Protestants. Lutherans, Baptists, Northern European, Scandinavian, British Isles. And the Jews and blacks collectively were maybe 3% of the population. And so the WASPs of Minneapolis saw no need to compromise on anything. And there was this kind of wraparound racism and anti-Semitism in Minneapolis that pervaded every aspect of life. Vigilante terror, like when a black family bought a home in a white neighborhood, 5,000, 6,000 white people besieged their home night after night to try to drive them out. Jews couldn't belong even to A there. But the other element, they were right. Sam Shiner once sent a rabbi, and I'm going to test this. I'm going to find a turn down a rabbi. And he sends the rabbi to apply for AAA membership in Minneapolis. And I've read this letter, and they write back and said, we recommend that you put in your application at St. Paul, where the president of AAA was a Jew. In any case, the other aspect of Minneapolis, which was right up to the George Floyd era, is liberal complacency. That Minneapolis had this strong labor movement and a strong left-wing party called the Farmer Labor Party, but they thought that the only issues that were important were economic issues. They were really not interested in issues of discrimination, except if it ancillarily was improved by what they did through organized labor, even though organized labor was deeply bigoted in Minneapolis. And the newspapers, the voice of the establishment, their attitude was always only the dirtbags of Minneapolis, my term out there, only the great unwashed would go to a Silver Shirts meeting. But that wasn't true. The president of the Board of Ed went to those meetings. The president of the Business Association went to those meetings. Doctors and dentists went to those meetings, but they comforted themselves by saying, we don't have a problem. And all that adds up to this very treacherous wide berth to the practice of discrimination, financial oppression to vigilante violence.
Well, he was guided by Grabfelder, but there are just some incidents. He takes on battles where you don't necessarily have to confront it. Like, for instance, he was able to secure a pension from Matthew Henson to the North Pole because he was forgotten. But he fights for him, and that's the 1930s. And then I I don't remember. I was so much in the weeds, but I
I
was
know that
just
feeling.
yeah. You did 8 years, and then 6 years before you started writing. But he would just he was amazing in that sense. I mean, in World War II, for instance, when the Black Women's Army Corps people took up their fight, he just do it. And he was followed. That's why, you know, this is what I love that quick. I mean, left is just we constantly hear references to for civil rights, but I wanted to describe it, read it, or just give a quick summary of just how broad it was. Because this is other thing. Civil rights became something much bigger than the purpose. It was to finally give Black people first class citizen rights based on the law, but it also gave rights to all kinds of Americans. And yeah, and 1960, and there was a reason for it. Yeah, so the reason is so the last time there was a civil rights act was in the 1880s. That was obliterated by Plessy versus Ferguson. So now, President points out, what has a lot to do with this? Because how can we profess freedom and we're oppressing large numbers of Black people still concentrated in the South? So now the pressure's on to finally bringing civil rights into law. Now, he got a lot of help from Senator Lyndon Johnson, who found some proven ways to compromise and get a major public works project built. So he traded, he forced traded with and they get that bill passed. Well, you had many civil rights people at that time. I think prominently Clarence Nixon of Maryland and Baltimore, who was basically liaison to Congress. That doesn't do anything. Actually, it did. Because what it did, the civil rights commission was created, and now you can start documenting the Senate. Now there's a committed position that's moved, and then you can have to get it 64. And then now there are other ways to monitor what's going on now. Members of Congress in the South are extremely identified in Republic 48 party to discipline. So they said, you know how to treat our people down south. Why don't we just out there? No, they're not. So we had these two preliminary steps. So now that's 64 Civil Rights Act, and it's only up to 15. And even to Congress, it's amazing.
Yeah. What you have to realize is that heading into the 1948 Democratic Convention, the Democratic Party, has this devil's bargain built into it, which Wayne was referring to before. It has elements of expected labor, competency Jewish immigrant families, liberal intellectuals, but it has the southern party. I know today it's hard to imagine that. party like the Democrat side, but not the way it was then as an after effect of the Civil War and Lincoln being a Republican. And so FDR had decided he couldn't get elected without carrying South. He couldn't get his program to Congress without the powerful Southern senators and representatives being on his side. And so we appeased them in all kinds of ways, with ways of religion, ways they implemented, and by never having the civil rights side with any integrity to it in the Democratic Party platform. And heading into 1948, Truman wants to do the same thing. He wants to win the election. And basically, what you have is this convention called the Royal Movement, because with A. Philip Randolph leading a national movement for black draft resistance and refusal to serve as a American military segregated use the Dixie trap, saying we're going to walk out to the right platform. And their plan, so remind you of 2020, is we're going to win enough things in the South that neither the truly do will get a majority of the electoral college. The election gets over to the House of Representatives. And who's going to be in the pivotal position? All the Southern rednecks are going to basically be able to choose the next president. And then Humphrey and these liberal insurgents are insisting that there must be civil rights tonight. Partly, exactly explains that because of the Cold War, partly because of the moral issue that they say is unavoidable. You can't have built-in hypocrisy. The Democratic Party, the religious part of it, pragmatism. Big city politicians who aren't particularly liberal, but know that they need black voters in downtown places. All that comes together in this convention. And incredibly, Humphrey's speech, just 10 minutes long, convinces delegates. By the way, about 1,500 delegates between only 17 used to be white people to carry this, but they vote against Truman's wishes to avoid the issue, vote against the Southern walkout, which happens, and it's led by none other than Bill Clinton. And Southern Democrats desegregating the military, passing anti-election law, outlawing poll tax, and again, that's when we're saying Article 64, the fight also extends these anti-discriminatory protections to racial, not race minorities, but religious minorities, and national minorities. This is huge for Jews, for Catholics, for Japanese, and Chinese Americans, for Mexican Americans, and it sets the table for what happens in the mid-60s. A lot of the promises late 48.
And another constituent group when it comes to 64, white women. Because what happened when the 64 bill is now being debated, there was Democrats on the other side, Virginia Democrats, Howard Judge, Triangle segregation members. He headed the for many people died. So some like the right to have Howard Case Howard says, well, if you give black people these rights, the disenfranchised white women. So suddenly the two old men, Howard Smith and the baby, was still in 75, they started talking like two intake buses. And Seller said, well, wait a minute now, this is necessary. My house, I get the last say. It's only two words. And those two words are, yes, dear. And then they go back and forth. Now, the 15 or so women in Congress, they're kind of getting annoyed. Let's judge this on the merits. And one of the women members says, you know what? We're going to outlive you. We're going to nag you to death. We're stronger than you. So let's judge it on the merits. But that civil rights stuff, that's why there are all these types to it. So now, people based on their religious beliefs, their gender, you have rights that didn't exist.
they were
One thing we got together out of mutual admiration, to be honest, I've known Wayne's work for a long time as an author. I always, because of Seller's work on immigration, had admired him. Felt that just like people only remember Vietnam and his mistake in supporting it, people always seem to remember Seller at the end of his career when the Schwartzman beat him and he was being portrayed just as this machine hack. So I think we felt a kinship in trying to rescue the real stories, some of the things that much better that he had it.
And also they were progressive on the issue, but they were cold warriors. So that's what took them down. The difference Seller being thought of just hack, and that it was kind of unfair. It's just that he spent so many years learning to work with people who didn't like him, just didn't agree with. He, he was considered, the time passed. One way to describe Seller, he was born in 1888, so he was the last Victorian to walk in this earth. He still had this kind of way. He was actually progressive on women's rights individually, but he improved of the equal rights of men. Unintended consequences. Had more state students. He said, Professor, I'm feeling here on immigration and civil rights, but on women, I'm not cold. And I just said, it's similar in the fact that there is nothing specific with politics and prose. And he said 8 years, it's 13 years writing. Almost kind of the same thing for me. It was 7 years journey and um, about 5 of those years of research, but also it's a university press book, so it's very really deep. I went through multiple ones. The first one, I had trouble getting up in the morning, put my feet on the floor because they had young men who did 5 books on this subject and then I had 2 split decisions, and then I had to get 2 yeses for trial. So I had to perform that. And well, here's the thing about Seller. For someone who's been forgotten, there are 650 documents at the Library of Congress. If you bother to go look for it. Now, I'll confess, I didn't go through 650,000 documents. I went through a lot of them, wondering, why am I taking all these trips to the library? And then you a blind reviewer, and I'm trying to figure out this this person insisted that this book is ready to go, but just a really I need you to go to 3 the Midwest. I wanted to go to LBJ. I wanted to be like Robert Hero because they have a lot of paper. But those were the primary documents, and then there's 100 books I read. Celler turns up any biographer who's writing about the post, the American century, from the end of World War II to the 70s. They, if they're credible, they want to have to make this because it's mixed with immigration, civil rights, antitrust. There's a fourth piece, but I'm having a senior moment. But he was just involved in everything.
Right. Yeah. Very similarly, I spent, like Wayne said, 8.5 years, of which, the last 2 were writing and revising, and the first 6.5 were basically in the archives. Books like these, incredible. And for people like Wayne, we want to be historians, we have to formally train, and we really need to prove our mettle to formally trained historians that we can do what they do, which is go into an archive and go through pages after pages after pages of those are called primary source documents and assemble the story that way. There were very few people who I interviewed because I'd only interviewed who had academic like 40. And anything they said in the interviews, I put through a lot of extra fact checking because you can't just assume a memory from literally 7 years earlier is at all accurate, not because people lie, but because they're fallible human beings. So most of the time was going through all the boxes, orders, individual letters at the State Historical Society of Minnesota, and then finding the papers for other people. Now Cecil Newman, who my editor said, my grid is the conscience of the book. He did not leave formal archival papers, and because he and Humphrey were friends who lived in the same city, they didn't correspond with each other. They didn't need to. They could visit in person. But I read on microfilm, because unfortunately this newspaper was digitized while it was done. But I read every word Cecil Newman wrote for publication in 1948. Most signed editorials, signed columns, you name it. I read it and get a feeling for him and get a feeling for that life in Minneapolis. And then, in terms of some of the country flows with the Dixie Pratt movement or this flagrantly anti-Semitic minister in Minneapolis named William O'Reilly, you go where the papers are, down to this Mississippi Department of Archives and History in one case, or over to the University of William O'Reilly to read all of his new-hating sermons and articles, and then ride my bike home and take a shower. So it's all, at least speaking for me, and I'll bet Wayne feels this too, great satisfaction of this group. I would tell my football students, you have to love the hunt to do this. If you don't love the hunt, this is not the job for you.
You have to love the hunt, and one of the most important things I would advise that Birch Bayh, the senator who paired with Celler on was still alive. He was in his 90s. So I was able to call him, go to his aide for him to confirm that yes, Celler, he wasn't just a name on the legislation. Celler that worked the members of Congress, looking cooperative, they were able to get that bill to law and to help the state sign in front of the statute limit, which now means if you want to come here legally, it doesn't matter where in the world you're coming from. So, maybe the great fight we're having now is over. This is the cultural, global nation. It flipped back to where it was 100 years ago when 1 out of every 7 Americans were foreign born. Now, then with the national origin, it 1 out of every 20. But now it has flipped back to 1 out of every 7 Americans. And most of the foreign born come from Asia or Latin America.
forgive me if it's not exactly on top. I think because of the Trump movement, because it provides fascism, um, the line has become very strong against this realization that as it was in the period of World War II, and others in the 40s that I wrote about, people who hate us think both of us as I think the symbolism of the practical John Ossoff Jewish, Reverend Raphael Warnock, doing a Democratic majority in the Senate, but Georgia, E.R. Kipsman State, making a black senator and a Jewish senator 2 weeks of each other. That was a really important symbol of Jewish motivation to align, and not done out of sentimentality, done out of really practical assessment of who the ally was to accomplish. The other observation I think that is how much that alliance really began in the 1940s and not a product of World War II. That I think a lot of Jewish Americans, anyway, when they think something that period, uh, 80s, mid 50s, mid 60s, when I see its formation in the 1940s, black soldiers had a term, the Pittsburgh Courier really popularized all black American federal groups. Double victory of fascism abroad, and then you leverage that as a victory over racism at home. And what I found that Jewish GIs, they didn't have that term, but they had a very, very, very similar idea. I remember reading this letter from the Minneapolis, and I'm going to go here and be critical of race. That was the actual term. But explain these people who know a lot that you don't have, that we're not all in the quartermaster, that we can be in the infantry. But then when I do that, then it's a more quality at home. And so there was really a sense of shared destiny, shared political cause going on before.
You know, I'm thinking about what you say. Our project is like 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and we just went to the big step backwards.
Yeah, I mean, I think American history has a set of cycles, and it's cycles of repression, resistance, emancipation, figurative progress, inevitably followed by backlash. Reconstruction was followed by the backlash of Jim Crow. Emanuel Celler's first fight, which Wayne Grace really in his book, was against backlash of mass immigration from Eastern and Southern Europe. People who were quite white at that time. In fact, like to shut down immigration, shut it down from China to Europe. You know about massive resistance to the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s. And so, in a way, of course, if the Barack Obama's moves to come, African marriage equality, constitutional rights, of course, there's going to be backlash against right. Yeah, exactly. Right. When I say of course, I don't mean we should throw up our hands. I think one of the lessons people like Howard, uh, uh, they understood and if we were to get back to America, if we were to get in the trenches, the process is to make breakthroughs you hang on to something that some of it is subject to being taught by the other side. If you're not going to get to the next year, then we're going to lose everything. And so I think actually the example that you taught repeatedly as a public health is a great time because it tells us, you're not tired, you're not in this class to your freedom. You have it all the time. That's never free.
Thank you. Let's give our guests a round of applause. This was a wonderful conversation, very thought provoking. And just a reminder that our bookseller is in the hallway, so go purchase the books. Holidays are coming up soon. It'll be wonderful gifts. So give yourself a round of applause for coming in because you've been a wonderful person. Thank you. The office will be signing up here at the front. So once you get your books, come up and get your books signed. Thank you for attending.